Hello, and welcome to the Unseen Question. I grew up surrounded by certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't ask questions because it believes it already has every answer. And for a long time, I accepted that as the way things were. I was told there was a plan, a guiding hand, a higher power shaping everything in life, from the smallest coincidence to the biggest tragedy. And if something didn't make sense, it was because I wasn't meant to understand. Yet, for years, that thought was comforting. Until one day, I noticed the comfort came from closing my eyes, not from opening them. I started with small questions, harmless ones, about contradictions in teachings, about why certain rules existed. But the answers I got weren't answers at all. They were walls. Walls made of repetition, of ancient words said without explanation. And I realized those walls weren't there to protect truth. They were there to protect belief from being tested. The deeper I looked, the more I saw how human everything felt. The books, the rituals, the rules, all carrying fingerprints of the culture and time they came from. Ideas about morality that matched ancient politics more than universal compassion. Stories of miracles that looked suspiciously like the legends every culture seems to invent. I learned how many faiths had risen and fallen before mine even existed. How gods once worshipped as all-powerful are now just characters in mythology. How certain I would have been in those gods had I been born in their time. That thought hit me harder than I expected. I began to see a pattern. Religions adapt to survive just like living organisms. They borrow from each other, adjust their moral codes when society shifts, reinterpret their own sacred texts when old rules become unacceptable. If a divine truth was unchanging, why did it keep changing? It wasn't just history that opened my eyes. It was also the present. I noticed how faith could make kind people kinder, but also make cruel people crueler. The same holy words could inspire generosity or justify violence, depending on who was holding them. I started reading about psychology, how belief isn't always about evidence, but about identity, how our brains are wired to protect the stories we've built our lives around, even when facts start poking holes in them. How cognitive dissonance can make someone double down when confronted with evidence, rather than reevaluate. The more I learned, the more I realized how much of belief isn't about truth at all. It's about belonging. It's about community, tradition, comfort in times of uncertainty. And there's nothing wrong with wanting those things. But when those needs are met by something that demands unquestioning loyalty, it comes at a cost. I saw that cost in friends who were afraid to speak their doubts aloud, in families torn apart because one person stopped believing, in people rejecting science, is progress, or compassion because it clashed with an ancient text. And then there was suffering. Real, crushing suffering. I had been told it was part of a larger plan, but when I looked closer, that plan always seemed to require the powerless to endure pain while the powerful claimed divine approval. When I saw children dying of preventable diseases while prayers went unanswered, I couldn't accept that silence as love. I studied morality without religion, and I found it not only possible, but stronger, because it wasn't about following rules out of fear, but about understanding consequences, empathy, and shared human well-being. It made sense that compassion should be grounded in reality, in the here and now, not in hopes of reward or fear of punishment after death. I started noticing how much beauty and meaning exist without the supernatural. The night sky is not less beautiful because it's the result of physics rather than magic. A sunset doesn't need a divine painter to be breathtaking. Love doesn't become less profound because it's born of human connection rather than celestial design. I realized that letting go of belief didn't take away meaning. It gave me the freedom to create it. I no longer had to force every event into a narrative written thousands of years ago. I could value life not because it was eternal, but because it was finite. And that made it more precious. I found that the world becomes both bigger and smaller when you step outside of belief. Bigger, because you see the vastness of reality unfiltered by dogma. Smaller, because you realize how much of human conflict is built on invisible lines and imagined authorities. I saw how progress comes when we question, not when we submit. How every advancement in knowledge has come from people willing to say, "What if we're wrong?" And how often those people were resisted, ridiculed, or even punished by defenders of the old order. When I finally let go, it wasn't dramatic. No lightning bolt, no epiphany that shattered everything overnight. Just a slow, steady peeling away of layers until I could see the world clearly, without the lens I didn't even know I'd been wearing. Life didn't become easier. It became more real. I had to face uncertainty without the comfort of everything happens for a reason. But I'd rather have truth and uncertainty than comforting illusions. Today, I see belief systems for what they are. Human attempts to explain, to control, to comfort. Sometimes beautiful, sometimes harmful, but never beyond questioning. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that doubt is not the enemy of meaning. It's the beginning of honesty. And once you start being honest with yourself, there's no going back. Some people say without belief, life loses purpose. But to me, purpose is not something handed down. It's something we build. Every choice, every connection, every moment of kindness, that's where meaning lives. I'm not here to tell anyone what to believe. But I am here to say that if you feel that whisper of doubt, it's worth listening to. Because sometimes the questions we're most afraid to ask are the ones that lead us to freedom. And as I kept thinking about it, I began to see how deeply these systems are woven into the structures around us. Not just in personal lives, but in laws, in education, in politics. Rules written in the name of morality, but actually built on the customs of a specific time and place, carried forward long after that time passed. I saw how certain beliefs, when given legal weight, could override the freedoms of those who didn't share them. How debates over healthcare, marriage, education, even scientific research were often decided not on evidence, but on the influence of ancient doctrine. And how easily words like tradition or values could be used as shields against progress. When I looked at schools, I noticed how early indoctrination starts. Children taught not just what to think, but how to avoid certain thoughts altogether. How some questions are encouraged, while others are shut down before they can take root. It's not about curiosity. It's about control. And control works best when it's invisible. When people believe they're making choices freely, but the range of choices has been carefully shaped for them from the very beginning. I realized this wasn't always intentional. It was just the natural outcome of passing beliefs down generation after generation without asking where they came from. The strange thing is, once you step back, you see how similar it all looks across different cultures. Different gods, different rituals, different sacred rules. Yet the same patterns, the same promises of truth, the same threats for disobedience, the same claim to moral authority. It's almost like watching different adaptations of the same story. And then there's the fear factor, not just fear of punishment after death, but fear of social consequences here and now. The fear of losing your community, your family's approval, your identity. For many people, that fear is stronger than any doubt they might have. I remember reading about people in certain countries where leaving the dominant faith isn't just frowned upon, it's a crime. And I realized that in more subtle ways, the same thing happens in freer societies too. Not through prisons or laws, but through isolation, shame, and the quiet erasing of relationships. One thing that always struck me is how many people believe they arrived at their faith through personal choice. But if you swap their birthplace, their language, their childhood environment, most would have ended up with an entirely different chosen faith. That alone should make us question how much of belief is truly chosen at all. I also began looking at how belief systems handle being wrong. In science, if an idea is disproven, it's discarded or adjusted. In religion, if a prophecy fails or a moral teaching becomes clearly harmful, it's reinterpreted, often in ways that keep the core claim intact no matter what happens. It's a self-correcting system, but not toward truth, toward survival. Some people will say, but look at all the good it's done. The art, the charity, the sense of community. And yes, there has been beauty. But beauty doesn't prove truth. A story can inspire great art without being literal fact. And compassion doesn't need a supernatural source to be real. In fact, I've noticed that when kindness is tied to belief, it can be conditional. It extends to those who share the faith, but often becomes thin or even hostile toward those outside it. Morality that depends on tribal identity isn't morality. It's loyalty. When I let go of the need for an ultimate authority to tell me right from wrong, I didn't become lost. If anything, my sense of responsibility grew. Because now the outcomes of my actions are mine to own. No divine forgiveness to erase them, no eternal reward to justify them. Just me, other people, and the reality we share. There's a certain kind of peace in that. Not the peace of thinking everything is part of a cosmic plan, but the peace of knowing I'm doing my best with the time I have. That my choices matter here, where they can make a difference. And I think about the future. How much human potential is wasted when minds are trained to accept answers without evidence? How many discoveries are delayed because new ideas threaten old dogmas? And how many conflicts could disappear if people stopped thinking their version of truth was handed down from beyond the stars? There's also the question of existential risk. When powerful people believe the end of the world is a good thing, or even part of a prophecy, how carefully will they work to avoid it? When leaders think human history is just a prelude to something else, how seriously will they take the responsibility of protecting this planet? For me, stepping away from belief wasn't about rejecting meaning, it was about taking responsibility for it. If this life is all we have, then every injustice matters more. Every moment of joy matters more. Every opportunity to learn matters more. I think that's why, once I crossed that threshold, I couldn't go back. Because I'd tasted the difference between inherited certainty and earned understanding. And once you've seen that difference, the old walls no longer hold. The world is still full of mystery. But mystery isn't the same as magic. Not knowing is an invitation to explore, not a reason to settle for the first answer that feels comforting. In the end, my journey wasn't from belief to disbelief. It was from acceptance to awareness, from repeating what I was told, to asking, quietly at first, then louder, "Is it true?" And letting that question lead me wherever the evidence went. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that real freedom doesn't come from knowing you're right. It comes from knowing you're willing to be wrong. Because once you have that, no authority, no ancient book, no fear of the unknown can chain your mind again. That's the thing about letting go. You don't just lose something. You gain space. Space to think without fear, to care without condition, to see the world as it is, not as you were told it must be. And that space isn't empty. It fills with questions, with curiosity, with a deeper connection to the people and the world around you. It's not about replacing one set of answers with another. It's about realizing you don't need to have them all to live fully. I don't expect everyone to take the same path I did, but I do believe in the value of looking where we've been told not to look, of asking the questions we were warned never to ask, because the things worth knowing are rarely the things we're handed for free. So if you've ever felt that small voice inside you, the one that wonders, that doubts, that wants to see for yourself, I can only say this: follow it. It might lead you somewhere unexpected. It might take you far from where you started, but it will always lead you closer to the truth you can stand on. And in that truth, you might just find not the promise of another world, but the full beauty of this one.